just a smaller Asian rug out there.
seat. So the mic was even. Father, just how is that volume? Is that better than it was yesterday? Try to have Deacon Sampson lean in a little. Before he begins his next session, Father Justin Patterson, if you come on down, make an entrance, please. Yeah. I wanted to speak to you about the Office of Pastoral Life briefly.
I promise to be brief after lunch. I'm here on behalf of Father Nick Solak. Father Nick Solak was appointed just in January of this year to be Metropolitan Ticon's administrator for the Office of Pastoral Life. And that office has been around for a long time, but in about 2 years ago, has been tried to revitalize it and bring it back to some measure of activity. And it's exciting because Father Nick is now full-time working, directing this office. And the office's goal is to really support clergy families, with the idea that if clergy are healthy and thriving, then their parishes will be better off as well. So it's a very simple kind of mandate. What's exciting is the 5 things that we're working on in the Office of Pastoral Life. The first thing we're working on, the Synaxis program. Quarterly, there's gatherings of clergy online with a speaker about some topic relevant to our life. We've had really good attendance for that in the last 2 years. We have a revitalized Clergy Wives ministry happening. Many of you're involved in this. Glory to God. We had the clergy retreat. We're having it every 3 years opposite the AAC. We had our first one in Illinois last year, which was a big success. And then, of course, our own Father David Rucker. Is Father David here? Father David and Manchester Roseanne are involved in Thriving in Ministry, along with other clergy, and I hear great things about that program as well. The new ministry is the Financial Health Initiative, which is really dealing with clergy pay, compensation, and of course retirement. We hear about this in our assembly, the need for robust retirement options. It also goes back to actually, if you have a low compensation, you're going to have a low retirement too. So all these conversations are happening, and there's now money behind some of these initiatives through the Lilly Foundation. And Lilly is funding Father Nick's position full-time this year. And one of the goals we have, and why I'm speaking to you, is to make you aware of some of this if you haven't heard about it. But secondly, we've created a fundraising team. And we are revitalizing the development office of the OCA in the name of OPL because we have to raise matching grants to fund some of these efforts that OPL is doing. So just be aware this is happening. And we're excited for 2 reasons. One, we get to actually see OPL's work get funded. And number 2, OCA hasn't had a development office since the time of Troubles, either part 1 or part 2, I don't remember which one. But we lost that. And how many of you know Nick Chakos? Nick Chakos is a Greek Orthodox. He worked for IOCC for years, raised lots of money for them. His dad's a priest in the Greek Archdiocese. And he sort of did a study of all the missed opportunities we have for raising money. And we have all these needs in our church. We want to do things to stabilize the pension, do outreach, mission work, clergy health, all this stuff. And we're finally able to say we're beginning a development office for the OCA. So please pray for us, root for us, and also know that you'll be hearing from our office, from Father Nick and from others, as we try to grow the base of our fundraising. And what's interesting, what we've observed is as we've talked with people, donors, about giving, we found that many of them have been giving very little to the OCA. And as we engage them, they're not only giving more to OPF, but also to their parishes. So we believe that as we connect to donors, it'll actually have an effect in our diocese, in our parishes, and opening givers' hearts to the work of the church. So please root for this work. If Father Nick reaches out to you, please take his call, and we're excited to be doing this with you and the diocese and the whole OCA. Thank you.
It's a joy to be with you again. Since we're starting a little late off the schedule, and because you heard so much of me yesterday, I'm not going to give kind of the paper to introduce things. I'm just going to go through some topics, and so we can start again, it's not question and answer, it's more the dialogue that I can learn from you as well. So the topic today is kind of one of the big topics around our culture. It's probably not a new thing that it's such a big topic in our culture, but the idea of identity, sex, and gender. So that's the jumping off spot. I don't want to say that we have to limit to those areas. Although I can say that when I started teaching SAT cons, I always thought it would be 1 or 2 sessions, but it turned out to be like 2 or 3 days. It seemed that we lingered on questions of sex, gender, and identity because it is such a cultural phenomenon. Before I get into those comments and we have that discussion, I do want to make some clarifications about what we talked about yesterday, based on some commentary and just me reflecting on what was said. When I gave an appeal, remember the other ways of doing ethics aren't necessarily jettisoned completely, you just don't have the full truth. And like I said before, when I was a decade ago, I probably would have just hammered in why they were so wrong. And now I can say, well, they have something that may be good, but they don't have the full orientation, the full light, the fullness of the truth. And then those 4 ways of thinking through orthodox ethics, again, isn't forming a systematic ethic that gets you to the right answer every time. It's not, and they have overlap in them. They're just ways that I think, again, I have nothing original. All these were gleaned from other sources, surely. Authority, who's an authority, what's an authority? Lingering on that just a bit. What is an authority in the spiritual life? I mean, in an ultimate sense, there's one who is praying truly, one who is purified and illumined in theosis. That doesn't mean that holy elders become omniscient, though. I think we commented on that as well. And there still may be some limits of knowledge. But also, appeals to authority don't mean that there's not times that you have to act upon conscience. There's just a right way to do that and a wrong one. And in many of our spiritual lives, the bishop is in authority as the shepherd of his flock. And if you're crossways with the bishop, then tread lightly. And you may be blessed by obeying. But it's not saying that there's not a time to voice concern or otherwise. But it's also a time for us to reflect when we have some of these disagreements with someone who's in authority. We can reflect on how very American we are. I mean, we have an assumption of our individual right and liberty to be able to do that. And I'm barely an American, I'm a Texan. So I even have more of an individual right and duty to do as I want. And if the general ethos in which we abide is one that if you tell me I can't do something, I want to do it all the more. And sadly, we kind of give in to that. That's nothing, that's egoism and pride. I know that, that's what America's known for. And we haven't escaped, as much as you were here, you haven't escaped that tendency completely. So when there's, be slow to call upon your conscience until you've put yourself in check. I guess is the side comment I'll make about that. The other aspects, let's see, I made mention, we lingered a bit on intentionality in ethics. And I don't want anyone to hear wrongly. I do think we need to recover the concept of unintentional sin and the reality of sin, these other ways of thinking about sin, and that will help us more fully grasp the prayers of our church and the healing that is needed. For instance, I mentioned miscarriage, and there's other things that happen that would be along this line. Within healthcare right now, hospitals across the country are trying to do programs in moral distress. they're wondering why people are so upset, miserable, if you will. They're so burned out. They're so troubled with the kinds of care that they're giving. And some commentators get close to what the ailment may be, but I think they miss the mark. Jonathan Shea, who Timothy Patitsis in his book Ethics of Beauty calls upon Jonathan Shea's works. I had the joy of sharing a stage with Jonathan Shea for a couple days, and I think Jonathan Shea, who's not a Christian, but was a psychiatrist in the VA dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, he sheds a lot of light on the concept of moral distress. So he would have these soldiers that were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and he said, this is really something different. This is a moral injury. This is something that's changed to them. And what Jonathan Shea wanted people to call upon was ancient pagan Greek society that the soldiers would come home and they'd sing songs and write poetry and have plays, and their sacrifice, their injury was always put into this rich context of why they did this, what the mission was about, and why they're the heroes of the people. In contrast, he saw that America doesn't treat its soldiers this way. I mean, in some conflicts, like Desert Storm or something, there may have been a parade, but not something ongoing. And matter of fact, in many times of in the recent past, there's songs against the conflict you were in, and more so than songs of it. So I think Jonathan Shea's onto something, that there's something more than this diagnosis of post-traumatic stress, but I argued with him that I think it's only a partial diagnosis. It's a partial glimpse. That more often than not, especially in the world, which people want to generalize this idea of moral injury and moral distress beyond the conception of the military to something like the hospital, or even the roles of clergy. It kind of loses much of its applicable truth, in that a soldier may be told, destroy this village. And they know in doing that, they're harming innocents. And there's that moral injury there. But what happens in the hospital, per se, is a nurse may be asked to take care of a patient with a dismal prognosis. And she may feel powerless to help the person. And some may say, oh, the doctor's making me do this, or the family's making me do this, but that's generally not that true. Sometimes, maybe. But I can say in my experience with hospice care, where the family was all on the same page with the nurse and the doctor, and everyone's on the same page, there's still this concept of moral distress and burnout and just fatigue. People are, they're distressed, and they can't exactly say why. And I think this reality of sin gets to the real cause, and that when we're exposed to suffering and death and disease, we're experiencing the reality of sin. And it does wound our souls. And we don't necessarily need patriotic hymnody and dramas, but we do need the great services of the Holy Church to heal our souls. So my concern about neglecting unintentional sin is I think we miss the fullness of the healing ministry of the church. That being engaged in the full sacramental life and personal pious prayers can bring about great healing, and I don't want us to miss that. At the same time, please don't hear me wrong. Intentionality is very, very important. And in ethics, and who cares about ethics? In the spiritual life, in providing pastoral care for penitents, their intention is going to be key. And so the writings of the church fathers, the writing of the spiritual fathers, all really, and the writings of the canons of our church, often focus on the intention. So none of my comments yesterday were to minimize the importance of intentionality. It was to take back what I think was missing from Western ethics after Thomas Aquinas, that there are other categories of sin that exist in the Holy Tradition. Okay, so intentionality, It's still very important. Matter of fact, if most people focused on not doing intentional sin, and that became what they were doing, this would be a good thing. One more comment on that. There is an application that fathers, you can grace, and fathers, you may correct me if you think I'm wrong. I'm not a confessor. But I've said this for a number of years, and some priests have found it helpful. Sometimes we are so Western-minded in thinking about intentionality that as penitents approach Holy Confession, they think of sin in a very certain, particular way. You know, what have I done that I intended to do wrong? And we know from the canons and other things that if something is done wrong externally, even if we didn't intend it, it still impacts us. If you're in a car accident, and even if you were the driver or not the driver, if someone was hurt, it impacts you in certain ways. All this said, I encourage us to think about Holy Confession not about just a list of intentional sins, but also about the burdens of life that we have. The burdens that weigh upon us, the cross that we bear, especially when we think it's causing confusion or a lack of faith or a lack of just focus, a listlessness. I mean, how many of your parishioners will go through, even the pious ones will go through long periods of listlessness? They're just numb. And they can't quite say what it is, but they have these burdens. And I think Holy Confession can be a time of therapy for these other types of sin that aren't just obvious intentional sins that we list. I'm not saying stop confessing those. I'm just saying we may want to invite penitents to cast their burdens upon the Lord, that He may lift them up. And that may be something more than just the list that they've made through some of the preparation tools that are there, but it may be saying, I'm weighed down. I have this burden. The nurse may say, I see suffering every day, and I hurt. I don't know why. She doesn't have to figure it out. She doesn't have to have the answer before she comes to you. She can just cast her burden upon the Lord. So that's why I think that section of thinking about the Orthodox moral life is so important. Now, so that said, we'll shift to something that I think is more about intentionality. Where intentionality becomes far more important. Different ideas. Identity, I start with, we made this in the discussion yesterday. We agreed our identity is only in Christ. We are the icons of the icon of the Father. Christ is the perfect icon of the Father. We are icons of Christ, and we are in His image and to be growing in His likeness by grace. And that is the only thing we are to have true identity in. Now, it's not neglecting that we are particular incarnated people from particular places with particular gifts and vices, etc. We can be aware of those. But many spiritual fathers will say that, especially our sins, we should see them as something external to us. It's the smear, the grime that's on the icon that needs to be cleaned away. We may be besmirched icons, but we don't identify with the grime. We see it as something external to us, that's not true to us, but something that we've taken on ourselves voluntarily, often, but something that needs to be cleaned away. So one of the challenges in dealing with sin in a modern aspect is the cultural kind of dialogue that insists, like Father Michael mentioned yesterday, of identifying with a psychiatric disease or a different type of disease, or with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, or with a career, identifying overly with one aspect. And if you turn to, this is one of the challenges about 12-step programs. I mentioned yesterday that when doing some work at St. Tikhon's, I was invited to observe an AA meeting. I thought it was just this amazing amazing example of repentance in action. I really commend parishes having AA groups, SA, NA groups available in their space. But there is a danger with one of the first steps that I think is can get some of the 12-step programs off. And that is this danger of identification. In the AA meeting, one may raise their hand and say, "My name is Tony, I'm an alcoholic." Some people will take that outside of the AA meeting and will present, one prominent person within Orthodox circles who I argue with all the time on this, even though he's been sober for decades, may, if he were giving these series of talks, may say that he's the local drunk. Now, he may be doing that for effect, but that's not what the AA book, I read the book, it doesn't say to do that. You only say that identity is just it's a confession to the group that I'm one of you and we're going to try to help each other through this. Once you leave the group, you don't say, "I'm an alcoholic," unless you're confessing to someone that you hurt. "Tell me how I hurt you because I had this drinking problem," or confessing to your priest, or for the non-Orthodox, you confess in some other ways. So if you have parishioners that are engaging in 12-step programs, I've seen this so often get confused. Please emphasize with them, they are Christ. That they can see the sin that is destroying their life, and they must admit, that sin's beyond me. I can't heal myself of this sin. I am an alcoholic. I can't heal myself. But that's their sin, and Christ can heal them. And they can be a pristine icon. Only through the power of God. So please, I think that's an important aspect of identity, and I really, again, I commend 12-step programs. I think they're very, very helpful, and we should be engaged with them as much as we can. But I do give that one caveat in warning, that sometimes the identity can go too far. Okay. So then, just brief comments on sex and gender. Obviously, sex, you can think about the act of sex, which is permitted within marriage between a man and a woman. It is blessed of God, though it's not required of God. Celibacy is blessed of God, and in some ways may be superior in certain practical aspects, but the marriage bed is undefiled and blessed of God. These are things you all know. If we have questions about some of the different aspects, we can learn together. A different term has become, over the last 100 years, has become more popular, and that's gender. Generally speaking, or if we want to be very simple, the Orthodox Church does not know anything about gender. We know about sex. Sex being a binary of male and female. Okay? And gender, the way it's defined commonly over the last 100 years is that it's a social construct, and it's about a role taken in society. And we can, you can use the word gender. I'm not being the word police. I'm just saying that the simplest way to understand this is, from an Orthodox conception, we know biological sex. And we know the roles that typically go along with biological sex. And gender as a social construct is a challenging topic as well. And generally, gender as a social construct was brought about to bring changes in social mores around sex and gender. So it was emphasized in such a way for a purpose that would challenge traditional roles. That said, of course, we sometimes have too narrow a vision of what a role for a man and a woman may be. And we're seeing this somewhat with kind of the masculine reaction against the kind of effeminate wokeism or something, where there may be a recognized lack of masculinity and over-feminization of certain aspects of culture, and then there may be a tendency to make an overly narrow view of masculinity. I mean, the ultimate strength, the ultimate man is hanging upon a cross. the ultimate man, washed the feet of his disciples. We have to hold that in tension. And different people will have different natural inclinations. And accepting the small amount of diversity within those biological sex roles, I think, is necessary for us to realize. You may have a girl who's a tomboy. That may be okay. Culture is going to tell her that she's not just a tomboy. That she may have gender confusion, or she may have same-sex attraction. Because the culture is trying to also have too narrow a view of the diversity of human experience. So when it comes to something like same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria, the challenge that we have from just a scientific understanding in psychology, otherwise, this is just bad from a secular sense. Because normal sexual psychological development would tell you that kids think the darndest things. And many kids have experiences at a young age that may include same-sex interactions, the kind of playing doctor phenomenon when they're young, or may have attraction to a friend, but they don't know what that is. And most of the secular psychological data would show that that changes as they get older. Not always, but almost always. I mean, there's a change. And what the current culture wants to do is give the right of a child who's immature to make a decision and choose an identity before they're mature. So if they have a question about why do I want to hang out with my friend who's of the same sex and I'm not interested in girls, they may have thoughts of this, and someone may say, oh, well, you may be, this is one of the options in life. You may be a homosexual. We really just talked about same-sex attraction, right? And as far as we shouldn't, Orthodox Christians with same-sex attraction shouldn't identify themselves as homosexual. This is one of the challenges in what so-called conversion therapy. You're not trying to convert them to be heterosexual. You're converting them to Christ. Heterosexuals shouldn't identify themselves as heterosexual. Matter of fact, a man with opposite sex attraction has to find chastity as well, because he's to have eyes for his wife only. And even those have to be chaste as much as possible. So from the secular side, what we have is, when it comes to the LGBTQ movement in our country and in most of Europe, we have an unbridled ideology, political push, that's trying to drag the science behind it. The science has not shown what many of the claims that are made in the media or other circumstances. So some of those. One is, like I say, normal sexual development show that there's greater diversity as a child is coming into adolescence and adulthood, and to make a minor, an adolescent, seek an identity around sexual attraction or about gender is folly, just from a secular, scientific point of view. So that's one of the kind of myths. Two, the myth of genetic or brain anatomy determinism is a great myth. It's very popular on the internet right now, where you may have catechumens who have questions or Orthodox Christians have questions and they want to know, but the cingulate gyrus is larger in people with this. Well, we don't have any data that particular genes or particular neuroanatomical structures determine behavior. Now, they may have some predilections. You may find some genetic predisposition to certain compulsions, certain addictions, but there's not been a gene for homosexuality or same-sex attraction. There hasn't been a gene for gender dysphoria, and there hasn't been a convincing neuroanatomy change that accounts for the difference. In fact, neuroscience is pushing the other way. That the amount of brain plasticity, that is the amount of change that the brain can endure over time, has been shown to be much greater than we ever thought. When I was in medical school, really we thought about neuroplasticity only with infants and young kids. But data has shown that adults have neuroplasticity. It's not as great as babies and toddlers, but it still does exist. And what drives neuroplasticity, that is the change in behavior, a change in even structure of the brain and the neurochemical release of the brain, can be damaged. So after a stroke, finding new pathways. But it can also be change in habit, change in behavior, change in thought. Cognitive behavioral therapy, when people have abnormal thoughts and they want to stop doing something, they want to stop a destructive behavior, and they go to a cognitive behavioral therapist and says, okay, let's think about when you start, what gets you there? What gets you to that place? And let's try to make you think something else and do something that's more productive. This sounds a lot like replacing a vice with a virtue. And if you haven't read Bishop Alexei's book, Aaron Beck's Ancient Christian Wisdom and Aaron Beck's Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, it's excellent if you enjoy reading dissertations. But it's really an excellent treatment. So when a cognitive behavioral therapist helps someone think differently, it changes their brain. You know, if I'm stressed out, if I want to change my brain, my neurochemistry and all, I just can think of my wife and my daughters when I arrive home. And it changes us. So the idea that we are set and determined by neurochemistry or anatomical difference or genes just hasn't been proven. And your grace and fathers, even if it were, it wouldn't mean that it's necessarily moral. Even if the differences in gender dysphoria or same-sex attraction, even if we found a biological basis that was set, it would mean that our heart would go out to people with those challenges, which it should anyway. I don't know those challenges. I can't imagine. So our heart should go out to those people anyway. We should try to bring them healing. But even if there was some sort of biological determinant, it would not mean that it's consistent with the path of salvation. It would mean that that is a cross that the person has to bear. And we guide them on the way of the church. Because there is no, even if someone has a predilection to a thought or a proclivity, it does not mean that it necessitates a behavior. There is no biological determination of a behavior. A behavior is something that involves the intentionality, the movement of the will to initiate. So when some people will ask me at conferences if any of this is biological, I usually start by saying no, like I did here. But I also say, well, what if it is? Are not the genes fallen? Aren't our neurochemistry is fallen? It's not evil. We don't become Calvinists. It's not, or Neoplatonists. We don't say that creation is bad. We can rejoice in the goodness of it. We can also say, much like we are icons that are besmirched with sin, our good creation also has that tarnish. And that can affect our genes and our neurochemistry. I mean, and in that way, it's not that much different than the pervasive developmental disorders or a cancer or some other disease. That is the experience of sin, the experience of death before us. So, now, that's, I think, a framing. To get to, I mentioned Herbert Makusa earlier. He's not alone in this, but he's and some other kind of social trend, people that focus on social philosophy, really emphasize sex in changing the social mores of a culture. That and many of them actually wanted to attack the church specifically. And one way to attack the church is actually to infiltrate it. to say, because one of the challenges when you deal with something like gender dysphoria, and you affirm someone's gender identity, and you're caught in this deception of gender identity. The data currently show that some, if they have gender-affirming care, have less suicidal ideation for the first 2 to 5 years. After that, it goes back to about the norm. And the 1980s data, because this is not a new, we have slightly new phenomenon now in gender dysphoria, but it didn't even show that. It showed some worse outcomes when you actually had affirming therapy. So one of the reasons this is to be affirmed in such a delusion of sin. You have to hear constantly, well done, we affirm you. You should think of the Psalter. Well done, we affirm you. When we're caught in sin, we want to rationalize our own sin, but if we can surround ourselves with people that will say, well done in your sin, we'll be happy for a time. We'll be not really happy, but we'll at least have a defense against our own conscience, against the law that is written upon our heart. But once those voices quiet down, once those fair weather friends aren't there and no one's saying, well done, then despair comes. This is true with gender dysphoria. It's true with same-sex, with giving into the homosexual movement. It's true with many sins. So why the movement of kind of the political movement of Marcuse and others was to attack sexuality in order to attack the family and the church. One method of attacking the church is to actually infiltrate the church and have them become an affirming body. And if you can have a religious, sacred body continuously say again and again, well done, then the evil one has achieved a goal. And the sin can be perpetuated as a new norm. Okay. So some of the science around the kind of transgender movement to again try to deal with some practical questions and dispel some myths. One is there is no sex change. You don't change sex. Then, when I was in medical school in the 90s, gender-affirming care was also known as malpractice. I'm not kidding. There was a lecture that went through the history of gender-affirming care, we didn't call it then, and that the repeated failures, the failures that were in the 1940s, the failures that were in the 1960s, the failures that were in the 1980s, and they said, this doesn't work. And the prevailing notion at the time, which I think was very accurate, was that there are some people with something that looks like gender dysphoria. They're very diverse people, and their motives are different at the time. But there are some people that just have that. That's what they fixate on, as they feel like they're in the wrong body. But it's a syndrome without an effective treatment from secular modern medicine. I was asked as this modern wave was hitting, which is somewhat different, as this modern wave was hitting, I was hired as a consultant for one of the nation's largest insurance companies, along with an LGBTQ activist psychiatrist. And we reviewed all the existing data, and we came up with the same solution. This seems to be a phenomenon that some describe, and it really distresses some people. But it's one that has no, from a secular medical perspective, has no treatment. No successful treatment. And of course, the insurance company, like all insurance companies, didn't want to fund it. But the federal government passed a law under the Obama administration saying that no insurance company could blanket deny coverage. They had to take every case individually. Well, we don't do that with any other condition, any other treatment. If someone says, I want to give snake oil or concoction for cancer, the insurance company can say, nope, doesn't work. So they made a special rule for gender dysphoria. What that also does is it sets up lawsuits. So if you know, which the trans activists all knew this, if you know that insurance companies, including county hospital systems, including the VA, including TriStar, other things like that, if you know that it has to be individually reviewed, it means you can bring individual lawsuits because someone had theirs paid for. And you can fight for discrimination. And that was the setup. So insurance companies caved across the country because it was just cheaper to just pay for it. At least they thought. So the modern trans movement, and I said this years ago at a talk I gave at St. Tikhon's that's somewhere on the web. The modern trans movement was heavily resisted until there was a lot of money in the game. And I just can't make sense of it in any other way. Because anyone who can soberly look at the data can say that there's never been data to support this. And I just 3 months ago had a unfortunate meeting with Dr. Staffer, who's the head of WPATH, which is the trans group that decided this is the standard of care. And so he's a trans activist, endocrinologist at Mount Sinai in New York. And he even said, yeah, we have to be very sober in what we can promise now. We thought that we had better data, but as more data comes out, it doesn't look so good. But we still should do it, this is the right thing. Okay. As an aside, the reason he says it's the right thing and we should still do it is because they think the activist side will say the reason that you have bad psychological outcomes after a few years is because of the societal taboo. And so if you can decrease the societal taboo and the pressure on these people that are victims, then they'll be better. Yeah, I don't think that dog necessarily hunts now, but the challenge is that the data look the same as they did in the 80s in that regard. But even if true, if the societal taboo changed, and matter of fact, you got special status where everyone was saying, well done, we affirm you, it still wouldn't be right. So the sad realities, and I say this reluctantly. You know, if I listen back to my St. Tikhon's talk on this topic, I was really a hard-hitting medical critic, man. That was before COVID. Now when everyone became a hard-hitting medical critic, I have to say, no, that was my job. You can't do that. I have to be more gentle and say, like I said yesterday, medicine's diverse. It has good things and bad things. It's not all bad. Don't believe what YouTube's telling you. Don't believe it. Don't have immense trust either, because many in medicine are disoriented. But at least be an equal opportunity skeptic. Don't reject one to fall into another, horrible data, vitamin salesman arms. So, and I do think we're entering a real era of snake oil. So I'm sorry, buyer beware. Just be simple. Just be simple. Be minimal in those things. But money did drive things. Where did the money come from? Well, money came from initially from activist groups, and they were kind of the usual kind of big names like George Soros and Pritzker. And I'm not making those up. This is not like a new world order. We're not about to do the secret handshake, but this is verified. So in the Pritzkers, so the governor of Illinois gave a lot of money for this. So that kind of started things. Then there was a big influx from the pharmaceutical industry, mainly the makers of Lupron, the hormone agent that will block puberty, the puberty blocking drug, and then the makers of all the other hormones that someone have to take for life. And so it's easy for us to say, oh, well, they were just doing it to capitalize on a new market. I'll also say they were being heavily pressured by that activist. Many of those activists with big political players in them, they were heavily pressured to give to those causes because they made those drugs. Now they want to make profit, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they're not victims either. But the money came in there. But still, that's when the YouTube generation started getting behind the trans movement. But medicine wasn't there. Medicine was there after there were a few conferences showing how you could change billing. So, where you could stack a procedure. So if someone's going to have a top or bottom surgery, that wasn't in the billing codes yet. There wasn't a phalloplasty code. So instead there were, to do all the things to do a phalloplasty, which is a misnomer, we'll get to in a second, you're really doing the equivalent of 5 surgeries. And one of my friends in plastic surgery would say, one surgeon that's doing 2 trans operations, 2 gender-affirming care operations in a week would bill more than he could doing a surgery every day, doing multiple surgeries every day, because he could stack the surgeries. And that's when medical centers, especially large academic medical centers, became very interested in that. Now, they also had pressure. I know at multiple academic medical centers, it was a daily peppering, wanting these procedures, and wanting the person on the other line to say, we don't treat you, so they can have that on the recording and come after you. So there's this constant kind of legal pressure on one side, and then they saw profit, and it was like, okay, we're going to do this. And thankfully, most states have passed religious liberty clauses, meaning that professionals don't have to participate. If you have parishioners that are worried about being forced to participate in types of medical procedures that are clearly wrong, they shouldn't be afraid of such. The law of the land is that that's not allowed. It was even just affirmed by the Biden administration last February. So we have great religious liberty within healthcare. But many healthcare professionals are very scared and silent, largely because their employer and their coworkers often don't know about the immense religious liberty we have in our country. That was even just affirmed by the outgoing Biden administration last February. In most states, especially in the South, have religious liberty bills that give kind of a state protection as well. Okay, so what some of the challenges with gender affirmation? One is that the gender affirmation of the 1960s and the gender dysphoria of the 1960s and 80s looks a little different than it does now. Now you have a very diverse group of people seeking this, and the percentage is much, much higher than anyone would have ever predicted. The previous data, this was a very, very rare occurrence, and now it's much higher. And there's clearly a social contagion aspect to it, especially in that era of social media. And if you want to publish that there's a social contagion, even if you were a member of WPATH, which was this medical and scientific group that said we should do gender-affirming care, if you publish in a major journal on the social contagion, you may lose your job, at least a few years ago. That happened to a psychiatrist, one at, I think in Louisville, and another one at Cleveland Clinic. And they were for it. They were just trying to say, well, there's something else going on here. One of the concerning things is the concordance between women with autism or autism spectrum disorder and identifying as trans. Well, that's not a treatment for autism. But especially girls with autism often want to have some sort of belonging, they know something's wrong, something's off with them, and they see this extreme identity as an answer. And there's one of the very good epidemiologists that's really defined this is a man who became trans, has some spectrum symptoms himself, goes by the name Hashi. But Hashi is an AIDS researcher. And just when Hashi saw the data, just said, this is too much. We're taking advantage of people that need our help in other ways. I know some other trans regretters like Renee Jacks. Renee was born male and is a man. but had gender-affirming surgery a long time ago. And Renee moved to Asia with a group of other kind of LGBTQ group to live an isolated life in a culture they thought would be more acceptable. And Renee started speaking out against the trans movement when Renee heard that they were allowing minors to have hormone blockers and decide to transition. And they were claiming that it would reduce their suicide risk. And Renee wrote, one of the first things Renee wrote, it's not she, he. Renee wrote, "All my friends are dead." How dare you make that claim? And how dare you let a 10-year-old make that claim? So Renee still dresses like a woman, presents, as Renee, but now is really disillusioned by this. And one of the most famous trans regretters is Walt. Walt is easily found on YouTube. I know all these people from policy work I've done. Walt was made to think he was a girl by his mom. He had a disturbed mom, and went through very, very early age, had affirming care, and came to Christ as a Protestant, and had reversals, which is another myth. There's no reversal. We'll get to that. And is a married man, living that life and speaking out as much as we can. So what will happen, if when I gave this talk, 8 years ago or more, I said the only end to this kind of trans movement insanity is going to be the lawsuits. That the trans regretters will have to regret really fast, because the statute of limitations on malpractice is only a couple of years, and usually they don't regret for 5. So now those lawsuits are going to be working through, I think. I don't have any inside knowledge here. I just know that there are groups finding the right cases to take through the courts, and that will get the medical establishment's attention. That's what does it better than just about anything else. But Trump has changed things. I don't know what tomorrow brings. There's definitely been a movement where it's very clear that as an Ohio State University professor, I'm not in danger of speaking against the trans movement today. I wasn't before. I'm tenured. So, but I would still potentially lose some of my positions, where now the new administration, whether you love them or hate them, that's one of the realities, is that there's no longer a most favored status there. So some of the myths. Okay, so what is the trans movement? So that many people that identify as trans may not have anything other than hormonal therapy. They may not have top or bottom surgery. They may not have facial reconstruction, but some do. And the types of procedures that can happen, hormone blockers can be started with minors. In a lot of states now it's illegal. Not all. About 22 still allow it. The Trump administration is saying it should stop completely. We'll see if that holds. But you could stop puberty, and if you stop puberty, you're not going to. If you can stop secondary sexual development, and then you start giving the hormones of the opposite sex, you will have someone who looks a lot like the opposite sex than what they were born. Okay. But even if you allow someone to go through puberty and you give them the opposite hormones at 18, and with top, bottom, and facial reconstruction surgery, you may get fooled. I'm not encouraging this, but you could look up, there was a bikini model who's a trans, was born male. And you won't be able to tell. And this is a challenge for our Holy Synod. This is a challenge for our clergy, as you may actually have to ask. Because there are some people out here that are going to try to change that. I mean, that are going to present themselves as the opposite sex than what they were born, and try to not only partake of the holy mysteries without your knowledge, but may even seek ordination without your knowledge. So I think in our age, it's now kind of a required question. That group is getting to that age where it becomes important. And if you think that you'll be able to know because you'll see the Adam's apple or the lack of one, no, that you can surgically change that. So the surgeries that can be involved are facial reconstruction, including Adam's apple or getting one, taking one off, breasts or breast reduction, having them implanted or taken off, and then the genitalia surgery, which again sometimes is not done. It's not done. Women who want to be men often won't have that done so they can be pregnant. So they can go off their male hormones for a time and and potentially conceive. But if they're going to have genitalia surgery, know that the genitalia surgery are misnomers. One, a woman would have something called a phalloplasty, but this is not a male genitalia. This is a muscle from the thigh that is crafted to look like a phallus, and is then a pump is put in it so it looks like it's functional, or a piece of bone from the tibia is put in it to look like it's sexually functional. It's not a sexual organ in the same way, in any way. And then for men who want to have external genitalia resembling a woman, their genitalia is completely taken off. I'm trying to be very respectful in our current environment to use. So and then they're given an invagination that is just their own skin that's invaginated, that has to be dilated and lubricated daily with usually a sex toy. And that's, if you don't do that, it heals because it's called a wound. Now, it doesn't meet the medical definition of wound, but the practical definition, it is. So that's the reality of those procedures, which means also if you have a penitent, which I know of a handful of these in the country, one of the questions is, do you make them reverse these this is genital mutilation, canonically. I mean, but the question is, do you make them do the reversal? Well, there is no reversal. To think of it as a reversal. Now, I think whether you have to encourage them to have surgery is a secondary question. I think you may have to insist, at least over time, and I'm saying as soon as they walk in your doors and as an inquirer, but over time, saying that they need to live with the sex role given by God, with the sex role given at birth, that they're to live according to the sex given, and to accept that givenness. Now, whether it involves surgery or not, I think really depends on the circumstance. If someone is wanting to have the reversal so they can approximate and resemble the sex they were given at birth, that may be able to be blessed. But the idea that it's reversed is not true. Even the hormonal changes are not reversible completely, because the brain exposed to testosterone is a changed brain. The brain deprived of testosterone is a changed brain. So these are the idea, in the media they'll often say that these things are all reversible, and they're simply not. Now, to be clear, when someone has a cancer of the genitalia or something, and you have a surgery that may resemble something like that, that's different. Canonically, that's different. The canons treat that as the surgeons do this to try to help you. There's many commentaries on that, and there's not a special place for the genitalia as far as that goes. So if it's a cancer or if it's treating a disease, and here we're not counting gender dysphoria as a disease worthy of genital surgery, then it's a different thing. But so that's the lay of that land. We are in a very changing place with it policy-wise, as most states now have come out against rules against everything from forced speech around pronouns and names to not allowing minors to go through gender-affirming care. I think this is overall good, but I do worry, I think. These are hurting people. These are really hurting people. And I worry that because they've become this lightning rod for the culture wars, that they'll just see us as their enemy. And they won't be able to seek the healing of the church. And I'm not saying that you affirm them in their sin, but I do encourage you to love them as much as you can. And before you tell them what they need to do, to listen to them and hear their own story. And I would say the gender-affirming movement is a story of deception. You know, they may, that man who had really excellent surgery, technically excellent surgery, and looks like a woman may deceive you and make it seem it's a woman, but it's not. It's a man. It's a deception. I would encourage you to see them as deceived. That these are people with problems that are vulnerable, that are deceived by a culture who has said this is the answer to your problem. Deceived by medicine that didn't have the courage to say, no, this is wrong for you. And so see them as deceived. And, to put the following judgment, that if you were in their place with their challenges in life, have fed the same deceptions, you may have made the same choice. And if you can approach them with that prayerful attitude, perhaps you can help bring them to healing. So I'll stop there, and I don't even know what we're doing time-wise, but we can have a discussion on these things. Is there a microphone? Oh, I'll mention something else, because I think Father Marcus wanted me to mention this. At least, you didn't tell me this directly, but I did say something about sex being binary. There are obviously intersex conditions, sometimes called hermaphrodites, sometimes called ambiguous genitalia. Many times these become very clear over time. There have been different approaches medically on how to deal with them. The current approach is to be patient, make sure that you have functioning for your bodily fluids and excretion, but to be patient, and then to discern what the best action may be. Sometimes that action may be no action, maybe leave things alone. Sometimes that action will be if the child is XY or XX, sex chromosomes, the norm is going to be that that's their biological sex, unless they have a fairly rare condition called testicular defeminization or testicular feminization, where there's no testosterone receptors in the body. I can sometimes get this with Christian writings. We'll say, sex is determined by genes. Well, there are XYs out there that look like women, and they behave as women, and our church would treat them as women. It's because they have no testosterone receptors in their body, and they often don't know that they are XY genetically until they have an infertility workup. And I don't think that that's a controversial. They're phenotypically, Engelhardt did say there may be some challenges around some of these phenotypically looking women being the spouse of clergy, because the idyllic model or symbol that the clergy and the clergy family have. I think that's for a bishop to decide. But other intersex changes are very difficult, because there's some that involve sex chromosomes that are XXY or Klinefelter syndrome and other things like this. These are very, very difficult, and often take really correspondence with the family, the priest, and surgeon, and may even take someone with a holy elder or perception to help guide, because these can be in extreme cases, it can be very difficult to know what to do. Engelhardt really pushed for trying to use medicine to approximate the sex that should have been at birth and to correct the deformities. I'm a little lighter on that, in that I don't think you always have to correct things. I think there may be an overemphasis of the appearance of genitalia. It's more about not denying the role that's given. Okay. Yes, quick question.
You mentioned that we need to ask people, I'm just curious, your experience, judgment, how would you phrase that question, and at what point in the process of getting to know the person
I don't know. I mean, the question is, how would I ask people? Archbishop Paul actually, in a joke, because he was considering me for ordination of the diaconate, and he started taking me through some questions. He started like, Samson, are you really a woman? You could do that. As tactfully and lovingly as possible. I think making it as procedural as possible as you learn something. Before someone's going to be a reader or something, if there's a list of a questionnaire, making sure that's a prompt. I mean, for anyone who's going to be in the ranks of clergy, you're asked a lot of questions about your marriage and your past, and I think insisting on that kind of question is appropriate relationally. But it is difficult because there will be some that you won't suspect it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, as you can, I'm not going to give you the words, Father, because, I've already said having a universal approach may be wrong, but actually a universal approach may be best. Right. To make it a nice, boring checklist. Yeah, ask everybody, do you have any of the following problems? And one of the challenges that we have, I mentioned a little bit of this yesterday. I was a convert that was reading the church fathers and very theologically astute as a Protestant. I don't know about you, but our parish is having unchurched people come in. When you talk to them about why they shouldn't cohabitate or try to define fornication, especially if you're going to include fornication, it includes masturbation and pornography and things like that, they're just aghast. What? I mean, they don't know what sin is. So I would think that one approach would be to, I actually think one of the podcasts mentioned this, and I think this is right. Sorry to point at you with podcasts. But the idea, the former kind of catechesis, the Orthodoxy 101 class, which I benefited greatly. I went through Father Alexander's, and I learned a lot. It was perfect for me. It may be that we need to focus on ethics, and not ethics like the system of ethics, but what is a moral life? How do Christians live? What is the way? Not that we don't talk about those in our kind of Orthodoxy 101s, but it maybe instead of the comparative theology, the comparative Christianities, which may be open questions, and you may need to do that with your converts, especially here in the Christ-haunted South, as Flannery Connor called it. But in Ohio, I have more unchurched people coming in than churched, and they don't know what sin is. And so maybe we need to do that before reception into the catechumenate even. I would say before catechumenate more than.
An observation for your comment. If you use DNA as a justification for various different, homosexual or whatever, I guess what I'm trying to say is philosophically, you're in the same bucket as the Martin Assad, who said that nature made men bigger than women, therefore they can and should do all sorts of lawful. It gets very the slippery slope.
Yeah, no, I don't want to be, and everyone should want to not be in the same sentence as Marquis de Sade. Although some of his writings are questionably, maybe the spirit of. Yes, I think the emphasis around same-sex attraction is that all of us are called to chastity. What that chastity looks like differs. Sex is blessed within a union of holy marriage. But that still doesn't mean everything goes. Now, there's some people that fall off on, don't hold the antinomy of what's permitted in marriage very well. Some will say anything goes, and others will say, well, live as brother and sister. as soon as possible. And if not, you're not faithful. I think that goes too far. And I think it's a real misreading of St. John Chrysostom in a particular book. But I do think there's something to that. Those who can live as brother and sister, glory be to God. I mean, again, that asceticism is just to be commended, but you don't want to give something greater than what the penitent can bear. And I've watched many, I'm sure you have too, watched many kind of hyper-rigorous couples go into certain directions and they almost lose their marriage or do lose their marriage because they mistake their failing in asceticism to be a failing of the faith and a failing of the relationship. But the other side, I mean, I know far more Orthodox couples that have no idea that there would even be a marital fast. I mean, that's more common where we are. So I think holding that antinomy, those antinomies, holding that tension and finding the path between. To answer your question, yes, I think it's a comment more, right? To call upon, to call upon all to chastity in behavior, I think is the answer, even if we found some sort of biological turn, if there was some gene that predisposed someone. We know that there are some genes that predispose people to addiction. Well, that doesn't mean that addiction is we don't say, well, be an addict, you can't do anything about it, It does mean that we have a heart for them and that we know that they're going to have a proclivity and a challenge that will be greater than anything we know. I mean, and so many saints, contemporary saints will say this. I know St. Porphyrius and St. Paisios and others have said this, to really have this air of humility, which is hard for a Texan. But this air of humility that when you see someone in sin, that you say, he must have a much harder life than me. He must have been exposed to things that I wasn't exposed to. And if I were in a circumstance, I would probably do far worse. Father John Kowalczyk at St. Tikhon said that doing prison ministry changed his life. Because when he sat down and just listened to these men's story, he found out by the time there were 4 or 5, they were already on the road to prison. And he can't imagine the life that they lived. And he learned how to love them. And he's had baptisms in the prison and some people that you would never think would come around. So I think that's the spirit that we should have with this. And I mean, I'll have commentary tomorrow about the culture war and why it's so dangerous for us to think through Orthodox ethics and the culture war, through cultural lens. And especially when it comes to this, I mean, I know of 2 parishioners that were trans. Both of them thankfully didn't have bottom surgery, and both of them have detransitioned, and both of them are married. And most people in the parish don't know that history. I have a unique view because priests call me, and I talk to bishops. I never do anything without a bishop on these cases, by the way, but I can give information. Other questions?
Well, can you speak to the phenomenon, maybe more recently, of gender non-binaryism? And is medicine being employed to further help curate ever-increasing non-binary expressions?
Yeah, so non-binaries, they don't know, they don't, either they don't identify as either. Willingly, or they sometimes identify as something very bizarre, maybe non-human, and so, or there's other sexual identities of polyamorous or asexual. I had a relative post on social media that he was asexual, and I called him and said, "Are you an amoeba?" I mean, I know what asexual means in biology, and I don't think you're budding, right? Yeah. So and the poor guy, I mean, he was on antidepressants, and he's of a certain age, and he has anxiety problems. I said, it's okay for you not to have a strong libido. Thank God you don't. Be thankful for not having a strong libido, but don't identify yourself as asexual while you're on these things, or at this stage of your life. Medicine, I don't think, who knows what medicine's going to do? All bets are off. I can't predict. I mean, I never would have predicted a Trump presidency 2016. I wouldn't have predicted what it did. I don't know what it's going to do now, and I don't know how it's going to change society. I know we live in interesting times. What I can say is that people that engage in alternative lifestyles often come to know the despair that exists in them. That doesn't mean there can't be love within them too. And that's one of the challenges pastorally, is when you have two people that, or two or three, or when you have loving relationships that you can't affirm completely. But I don't know, I think our culture is really confused when we think a loving relationship has to have sex. You know? So I think that's one of the challenges. Yeah, I'll move on. I think they can go ahead. Or someone has a microphone.
Yes, would you be able to just provide for us or people who would be interested, the studies that show that what you had said, that after a particular period of time, the SI that manifests following an attempted transition?
Oh, yeah.
Can I show the,
Yeah, so I would say the challenge with some of that, those data aren't always published with the same vigor. I mean, there really was a chill around any publication in a major journal that would say anything contrary to the affirmation movement. And it wasn't a slight chill. Like I said, I know academics that lost their jobs.
certainly, but that's why I was asking, if there are actual.
Yeah, there are.
It's made it out there.
Yeah, it's out there. It's out there. And so some of them are inside knowledge about some large trials that are going on. Whether those data will be published or not will be very interesting. So some of the large trials that are happening aren't showing great outcomes. I think they will be published because I think there's enough honest scientists in those trials that they'll want to get this out. They won't have the same assumptions as to why that it's not as effective as what we may have, but I think it will be out there, and I can try to find some of the resources. Yeah.
It's just, when people make claims about various things, the answer from, many people in a secular society is, well, prove it empirically.
Yeah.
Tell me what the evidence is for what you're alleging.
Right.
And so this, I have found when talking to people who are Christian about these issues, if I can approach it and I tell them, listen, I want to start with the science textbook. I don't want to start with the scriptures, even though I very much believe them. And I want to have that conversation, but just to begin with. Let's talk about empirical science that we can all look at.
Right.
And ask, does this make sense?
Right. I mean, I think there's a great deal of wisdom in doing that, but I think there's also a challenge. So the challenge is going to be, for instance, I was working with a plastic surgeon at an academic medical center that was wanting to make an evidence-based appraisal, and he was just wanting to stick to the science and say the science doesn't show that this is effective. And so he kept bringing study after study after study, and it would be countered with you're misreading the study, and it doesn't quite say that. There'd be different interpretations of similar studies. And there was enough ambiguity that there were two plausible sides, like, if we can decrease the taboo, it could do better, and isn't it better to have 5 years of better life than none, things like that. When it boiled down to, he had a completely different presupposition of what health is. Even if the study showed that it was effective in a worldly way, we would still say that it's not consistent with health. I mean, your parishioners will hear these things on the internet. There was a big urology study showing that the increased number of emissions a man has in a lifetime decreases his risk of prostate cancer. And the study concluded, therefore, a man should maximize his number of emissions throughout his life. And that has been picked up by the media, the medical media influencers, and so now they're saying that's part of good sexual male health. Well, it's inconsistent, even though the trial did show that. I think it's a pretty poor trial, honestly. But so the evidence, the tactic I would encourage is actually to flip it, and you show me that evidence. Yeah, I mean, I think we can have the evidence that pushes back. We don't want to make that the basis of our understanding. I just haven't found a lot of compelling evidence that would say that there actually is a big improvement in suicidal ideation over a 5 to 10 year period.
I don't think that we would be able to post anything conclusive
Yeah.
from any kind of thing that's still in clinical trials, but at the same time, really just to be able to maybe reach across the aisle and show folks like, listen, this could only take us so far, but we're not just making this about thing.
Oh, right. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I think that's true, especially when you're talking to people that are so convinced that this is dogma, and how can you Neanderthal think anything different, that you're denying science. I think having at least a conversational understanding of the science behind it is helpful. I do. I mean, ultimately, we want to move beyond the cultural trend as our concern. Ultimately, we want to care for the soul that's before us. And hopefully that can transcend even the scientific data, it may be a helpful tool to have to help convince people, to make them pre-contemplative that you're not a Neanderthal. You don't look like one, but I haven't seen your genes, so. But I think but I can try to find some things to answer the simple questions. Other questions?
Sorry.
Oh, yes, please.
You mentioned earlier in your lecture that the Orthodox Church doesn't talk about gender, it only talks about sex. One, I wonder if it's helpful if we, much in the patristic writings, they brought in a lot of the terminology, I guess, of the age or whatever to have a discussion. But I was thinking of Dr. Timothy Petit's the chiasm of gender, when he says, the issue that we have is people are coming to the Orthodox Church with either the left understanding of gender is totally interchangeable, or a right-leaning understanding where they're complementary. And he says, he feels that neither is a correct model in the Orthodox Church, that it's more of a chiasm where gender is fulfilled in the cross. Right? So there's fallen gender, and then there is deified gender. You think that's maybe the way that we could talk to people that are coming to us? Or is that a good place to begin with people? To talk to?
I'd begin with hello, but no. But I think Timothy Petit's book is fine on that. He's defining gender in a specific way. I think it's fine to talk about it in that way. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that you have to completely avoid the term. I'm just saying know that the term in and of itself is something that's fairly foreign, and it's very new in the way that it's been defined over the last 100 years. So a couple of comments that you brought up. One, of course, some of the writings within our tradition will falsely say that we've had non-binary examples in the saints, but of course these are not the same as gender-affirming cases of Saint Xenia putting on the clothes of her husband, or a female monastic dressing as a male monastic throughout her life to avoid marriage. So a woman dressing as a male monastic to avoid marriage or defilement in some way. The commonalities that these have, and this gets at Petit's point as well, is that they're all pursuing chastity. Most of the cases are celibate. I don't know of any that aren't. Often they're fleeing types of temptation, and so they're pursuing chastity. They're pursuing Christ. They're in celibacy. This is not for getting attention. It's actually to hide. Fool for Christ is a little different, but that is a humble role, so it's humble in itself, and it's not about sexual gratification or role or relationship. So it's utterly different. And the articles that came out on that from people that want to make that an orthodox view, I think, are howlers and should have been rejected out of hand by editors. But I do think practically to get at some of the practical things that Petitsis can get at and others is for us to have, I think there is this beautiful complementary relationship with husband and wife. We don't have to marginalize that or devalue that. We can give thanks to God. But one of the things that often we neglect in our parish is the role of singleness. So many Orthodox think that the choice is monasticism or married life, but some by choice and some not by choice may have a life of singleness, or the widow or the widower. And I really encourage you, as you think about how to interact with your community, how do you include the singles very specifically? Because they're often very they're often lonely and they are neglected. And realizing that, some of the traditional, we don't have to have just 1950s versions of what male and female are, that there are some diversity within bounds. Now, that doesn't include a woman who wants to look and behave as a man completely or vice versa. So there are limits, but I think there may be some diversity, and that is also one of the points that Petitsis gets at.
Some of us have had the resources in years past of Father Tom Hopko's book on same-sex attraction,
that's a good book.
which was kind of a first edition pastoral desk book for some of us. If he was alive today, there'd maybe be a second, third, fourth edition. I'd love to see that and what he would have done with it. Is there anything that you would say from that book, just one example of something today that we should be aware of as we interpret that text?
It's a good text. So I'll endorse it as much. I don't know if I can endorse every word. Haven't looked at it in that way, in that critical eye. I think the most important thing is actually right in the title, and that is instead of falling into the LGBTQ language game or homosexuality being defined by that kind of term, saying same-sex attraction, and making it about something that someone can realize they have within themselves, but it doesn't identify them necessarily. So LGBTQ is all about identity, homosexuality, heterosexuality is all about identity, and same-sex attraction is a proclivity. It's something that can be indulged, it's something that can be resisted, it's something that may be a temptation that's fallen into at time to time, but it's not something that's a constant identity unless someone embraces it and indulges.
One of the takeaways from that book that I would use as a missiologist in the training of future missionaries with OCMC a number of years ago was the quote that if I'm not willing to die for this person, my message is very limited as to what I have to say to them, which was very much at the heart of the missionary heart of being able to communicate the gospel and translate the gospel and live the gospel for others. And so we took that with us with our missionaries and the training of future missionaries, this compassionate willingness to suffer with this person and then being able to speak to them. We appreciated that.
Yes. Thank you, Father.
We'll go back here and then Father Justin and I won't.
So my comment's really short. It was funny, earlier you had mentioned that comment, the trans activist that you worked with. What did you say his name was again real quick?
Which one?
The one you said that it was basically...
Oh, for the insurance company?
It was the right thing to do. He said...
Oh, Renee Jacks.
What's that?
Renee Jacks.
That one. I think that was the one.
Yeah.
When you had said that, it was kind of funny because my brain to go look online real quickly to see on that. Showed that in 2022 there was $2.1 million made in sex changes.
Yeah.
Which, as soon as you made that comment saying, well, the data doesn't show up, my brain went, well, probably because when the money dries up, that's when his brain will change otherwise. So I was just wondering if you could expand on that a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, the money will be a driver, so I think there may be a cooling effect for sure, but right now the initial cooling effect is going to be politically motivated. It's going to be state legislatures and other things. The money shouldn't be as lucrative because those procedures are now not stacked, they're specific procedures. So that's true. I really do think that the next step, if there's a cultural reversal of this, which there has to be, it's just such a spirit of the age that needs to keep blowing somewhere else. Will be lawsuits that will be these rapid detransitioners. States could, and maybe it will happen, states could lengthen the statute of limitations for malpractice around gender transition. So that would be, it's something that was suggested at a policy forum that I was with. At the time, we thought it was not likely, but it did make some plans of potential ways of doing things. It's just no one really wants to open medical malpractice to forever because we all get sick and everybody wants to blame something when they get sick. And often if they ever had an intervention by a physician, they may point to that. So, that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I just wanted to expand a little bit on that, because it was such an issue of what you kind of glossed over. I wonder what he thinks on this one.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money in medicine. Money's not necessarily evil, and it's being thrown about a lot now. One of the reasons that the United States has the best technological capability in medicine, it doesn't have the best health system. It arguably doesn't have a health system, but has the most advanced technology is partly because of the profit incentives that companies have to do research. And my predecessor would defend that, heavily. He would say there's an ethical duty for profit if you want progress in things like medicine and science. Father.
So pastorally, I was interested in how this plays out in a real parish. 5 years ago, I had a guy that I baptized, and as he was being baptized, before he shared with me, he lived as a woman for a couple of years. He had an experience with God, he renounced that, and then came to the church and wanted to be a man, baptized as a man. So right as COVID began, he began to have second thoughts about this. COVID hit, he disappeared for a year. He comes back as a woman, and I tell him, and I talked to him, Alexander was very gracious to me and to him. Blessed me to not give him communion, unless he were to repent of this. But I told him, being naive, maybe, I said, I can't give you your welcome at church. Our doors are open. This guy was messed up. He was a sweetheart, abused sexually as a kid, all kinds of things. My heart broke for him. His presence, even without communion, created a huge problem in the parish. I had people ready to leave. And I consulted other priests about this, and eventually I asked the man, I said, please, you're dividing our community. Can you come and present as a man in our church? And he disappeared. But I feel like there were so many pastoral challenges in that whole exchange. My people were bristling, and I feel that they maybe they went too far, but maybe not. I don't know. I saw this man as a broken person who just was, I don't know, a lot of sympathy. I couldn't get communion, but I felt really lost pastorally. And I don't know if you have thoughts or the brethren have thoughts, but I'm sure we'll have these kind of things happen in the future.
I think, Father, what you illustrate is at least the right intent to try, and in some of the right safeguards. Could you have said, well, I can't have you come because it would be too much of a scandal for the parishioners? I mean, you could have, but then that maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe the embrace of the community would have changed things. Again, Father John Kowalczyk's story. At the prison, he encounters a man, presents and says a female name. And he says, "Oh, you're one of those transvestite guys." He said, well, God loves you. And, but we have to be, content with what we have. And he gives him a hug. And that kind of embrace, and then just treating him as a normal person helped this. I mean, that guy stopped identifying. I mean, all of a sudden, who knows? So maybe the embrace of a community without affirming could have helped. But then when scandal's there, I think reacting to the that it is scandalous. Now, I mean, I encountered there was a laicized priest that came to a parish that I attended, and I helped deal with this somewhat. That laicized priest was laicized because he had been caught red-handed by FBI sting operation trying to buy sex from a FBI officer who was impersonating a mother with an 8 and 10-year-old. And that priest didn't exist overnight on its jurisdiction, not the OCA, its jurisdiction's websites and everything, and that priest went to jail that very same day. But that priest got out of jail, and that priest came to the parish I attended. And I recognized him. And my priest that at the time did what every good priest would do. He said, you take care of it. So he was busy. So I went and talked to him, and he can't be there. I mean, anyone who knows the OCA sexual misconduct policies, this man can't be there. Now, does that mean that I see that he's beyond salvation, beyond redemption, repentance? No, I long for that for him. And he was at the door of our parish, not coming in, wanting to ask if he can. So that much respect. So I asked him a few things. He actually was still in denial that he did anything wrong, which made me think we really can't come in now. But we did come up with a new strategy. We said, why don't you, he had some other friends that's from prison, why don't you meet with them and we'll talk to a bishop and see if we can have a priest come out and talk to your group on occasion. So that there's no kids, there's no mixed gender, there's no mixed sex, there's no men and women. It's just a group of prisoner men that are going to be ministered to by a priest apart from the parish. And that may be some way to find before they leave, or as you're saying, I need you to come even if you reluctantly, even if painfully does it, I need you to accept the givenness of God, the embodiment that God gave you. I need you at least, if you can't fully accept it, I need you to realize that by casting off, by rejecting the embodiment God gave you, that you're not trusting in his providence, not trusting in his provisional care for you. I need you to know that that is a rebellion, and I can't show the people, the faithful, that we are going to endure such rebellion. But maybe when you're having that conversation, you can say, but if you can't do that, I want to meet at these times. Maybe with these people, maybe bring a deacon, maybe bring a reader, serve an akathist, or something like that can set him apart from the people, but still minister to him as much as he has. But I said, Father, the point, sometimes people are going to reject the love of Christ. And if they're scandalized that they can't be affirmed or they're so offended, it may be simple psychology, it may just be embarrassed. But it may be that there's so much, that it's so imbibed, it's so embraced, so indulged, that it's an offense that he's not going to overcome for a time. But who knows? Maybe in time. Thank you.
Time for maybe one or two more questions.
I just have a statement and I'm pretty loud so I can tell that people are asking how you ask someone if they had an dysphoria or gender affirming care or whatever. I have a list of questions that I ask Abby before making Abby, and I have a list of have you been involved in secret societies? Have you ever had pressure or any long-term illness? Have you been baptized? What church have you been in? Why you want to go Orthodox? Why you want to leave your church, your former church? And I have to go through all of them procedurally. Everyone gets asked these questions. And so at the very end, is there anything else you think I should know about you?
Yeah, I think that's the right way. Because not every, like I said, especially as we have a larger unchurched group, they may not know. They may not know that maybe they should confess the sexual assault they suffered. Because they would think, oh, I didn't do it, it was a victim. But that's something that would really impact the care of that person's soul. Not the details of it, but the generality. And if it's a man, what that assault included may preclude them from entering the ranks of clergy. So I think all those things may be important. Other questions? Comments? Well, there's a hand.
This might be kind of off, but it's just something that came to my mind as you were talking. You know, I'm thinking of the prevalence of eunuchs at one point, even like during Byzantine times, and it did not seem to be any kind of particular impediment for them in church, and some of them were quite pious. And of course, the Lord said, you know, some are made eunuchs by men, and some become eunuchs for Christ. Now, I know there's talking about two entirely different things, and Origin got in trouble for that, but I'm just wondering what, you know, if you have anything to say about that, or
Yes.
relevant on all this.
Thank you for the question. I think it's very relevant. And it's one of the reasons I used that this is genital mutilation canonically. Now, as you rightfully say, there's different types in the canons and in Holy Scripture, but it's elaborated in the canons and the commentary on the canons. So you have those who were made eunuchs by barbarians, or that they were they were emasculated. Those who are done by surgeons or by doctors for disease. Those who are misled into doing such by some form of delusion, and those who self-mutilate. One of the canons say that, or maybe it's the commentary, I can't remember. That's dangerous. I should be able to remember the difference because they're very distinct. The commentaries on the canons are not the canons. But it calls it self-murder. Self-murder. So, so it's the self-inflicted mutilation is called self-murder, and is anyone who participates in that is guilty of encouraging murder in that way because it destroys the embodiment of the particular person. And so I just talked to a physician, an anesthesiologist, who was asking me, so should I not agree to participate in these cases? Because she's at a hospital that does them. I said, you should not agree to participate in these cases. And I talked through with her how to do that. And she was completely unaware that she had legal protections to do so, as an aside. But I think the potential of eunuchs also, at least the historical, canonical, and scriptural commentary on eunuchs also informs some of the things we've said. It's one of the reasons I'm a little slower to agree with my mentor, Dr. Engelhardt, on the use of surgery to correct ambiguous genitalia or to reverse bottom surgery for people that had gender-affirming care, which is a misnomer. I'm just using it as a descriptor. I'm not affirming it as a good. I hope you know that by now. I think we treat them as these eunuchs of old that were either misled or they self-mutilated, but they're repentant. In more recent times in Russia, there was a group of zealots that self-mutilated. Actually, the women did too, in some instances. So, female genital mutilation, or sometimes called female circumcision, which is very distinct from male circumcision. Male circumcision doesn't change the embodiment or the inherent nature of male anatomy or ability to have intercourse, and though circumcision is not needed for any religious purpose and within orthodoxy, and the norm worldwide is not to have it, and the science doesn't really support circumcision in any way unless someone has a complication. Circumcision of men is just not important. Circumcision of women is genital mutilation and is attacking the embodiment of a woman. But this zealot sect in Russia would have often they would call it the full seal, so they would completely remove the genitalia of a man and just have a small hole in the abdomen for urination. This was just like other historical figures like Origen and others, but when you read cut off the hand that sins, that's some of the reasoning behind some of these zealous acts, but the canons and the fathers have clearly condemned it. I don't know why this Russian group came to that understanding. They were an apocalyptic zealot group that did this. Some of them were restored to the church, but I would never put a mandate that they would have to have corrective surgery in order to be a communing member. They would be barred from clergy, and if they were clergy, I mean, it's a bishop's decision, not mine, but if I were asked such, I would say that the canons would be consistent that they'd be laicized and be barred from the ranks of clergy. Yes.
So, Father David Arnold asked in the chat on the live stream, is it true that 2% of births are intersex? That figure seems
That's too high.
to me, but it is really
It's about 1 in 1,000. It's about 1 in it's about 1 in 1,000. Yeah, 2% is too high. Yeah.
Any other quick questions?
Now, I didn't look those data up before I came, so if I'm off, give or take 1,000, let me know. Yes, thank you. Anyone who doesn't know that, these data, it's a quick sign whether you know research or not.
If I may ask a non-sex related question.
Please.
What's wrong with you?
You're talking about intentional sin, unintentional sin. With intentional sin, obviously, as confessors, we talk about culpability, taking responsibility for it, acknowledging that, especially in confession. With unintentional sin, is there culpability? Seems like there is. But how do we communicate that without overwhelming someone with a sense of, it seems like you have to be a particularly strong person spiritually to accept culpability for unintentional sin. How do we get there?
To be specific, you're talking about the culpability of the penitent, not the culpability of the confessor, which there's both, right? I mean, one of the frightening things about being clergy is that you are, in some ways, taking on the sin of your parishioners, of the ones you're hearing. Now, not in the same way Christ takes it on, but not completely different. I mean, that is part of the dispensation of the charism of being a priest. One part of the burdens is we bear other sins. So I'd say we probably, as you're hearing something that may not be an intentional sin, a burden of life, if you will, can reflect as much as you can on how you do that, how you are going to bear that for them as much as you're able. Now, sometimes it's just with silence and, realizing that Christ has won the victory. I mean, one of the motifs that can be used for this kind of unintentional sin is kind of the ceremonial uncleanliness of the Old Testament, and how the ritual washings were often all that was needed, at least legally, to deal with the ceremonial uncleanliness. And so one way, with many of the kind of realizations, the burdens of life, the reality of sin, the nurse who's dealing with seeing disease and suffering and death, is to reassure them that the rituals of life that are in our holy faith, the morning and evening prayers, the psalms, the taking of holy water, the taking of Inteteron during the week, the attending the services, all those things are to renew us and to help us deal with that burden. As far as morally culpable, I wouldn't drive that in kind of the Western sense, which always goes down this moral agency idea that involves intentionality. We're all morally culpable for all things. This is the St. Ambrose that Dostoevsky wonderfully gets in Elder Zosima. So, yes, but it does take someone with spiritual maturity to realize that, we're guilty of every man's sin in some cosmic way, that we're all part of this great tapestry of prayer and spiritual life. And we try to keep it from unraveling as much as we can. But we're all connected in that way. How to do that, I've never heard confession, at least officially. I mean, I've had lots of people have told me a lot of things, but I haven't had sacrament. I haven't been a priest in sacrament of confession, so I can't give specific guidance on that. But I would say realizing that we all bear that. We all bear those. And what are the assurances we need to continue in our struggle? And to the assurances we need to remember that Christ has won the victory over all of these things. We just haven't realized the resurrection yet. Thank you. One more?
There's a group in Tupelo, Mississippi called American Family Association.
Huh?
And I saw a movie several years ago they put out about that the daughter was living in San Francisco and she was going through a change, and so she was mutilating her body, trying to become a man. And the mother and father, of course, were horrified and praying for their Christians. And the mother came to the conclusion that she wasn't going to listen to her. And all she could really do was pray and kind of try to make herself more holy and wait for God to intervene. And eventually the girl came back out of this lifestyle and is now witnessing kind of to the horrors of that lifestyle. It was in a movie I saw somewhere.
Yeah, there's several of those out.
Laura Perry was her name, I think. I just mentioned it.
Yeah, no, there's several. There was a big YouTube campaign with young girls mainly young girls, that were rapid regretters. So they regretted fairly quickly after their affirming care. And it's made a huge impact. So they've used social media, YouTube, and movies, documentaries to try to give some pushback. They're very brave for doing so. Yes. Other comments? Yes.
Anyone else right now?
Great.
Thank you, Brother Deacon. We have about a half hour. I asked Father Jason if he would actually give just a brief recap. About a month ago, we had a wonderful North American Deaf Association, not the Deaf Association. We don't do that in the Orthodox Church. The Deaf Association, and it was hosted here. It was a beautiful experience, and I wanted him to be able to share a little bit about that with you. We will have one more session tomorrow morning with Father Deacon, and I think that'll probably be open to a lot of different topics and questions. So
yes, definitely.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll be quick because I know you want your coffee. The Orthodox Christian Deaf Association, the OCDA, met here a month ago. We're very thankful that the cathedral hosted the event. We had about 50 people in attendance. 30 of those were deaf or hard of hearing. It was pan-Orthodox, and we're literally around the country. And so from that meeting, a lot of things have taken place. A lot of things are developing. So we're hoping in the very near future, the Assembly of Canonical Bishops are meeting in May, where they designated a group to meet in May to put together the first ever translation of the Divine Liturgy in ASL, to show you how far we are behind in reaching and ministering and assimilating the deaf community into the church. There's no sign for Orthodox. There's no sign for Orthodox Christian. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's being done, thanks be to God. So the point being, if you have somebody what's going to help us tremendously, if you have somebody in your parish or your mission that knows ASL first and foremost, or if you have somebody that wants to learn more about ASL, eventually once the translation takes place, then we'll be able to educate people on the local parish mission level and make the Orthodox faith much more accessible really to an unreached people group. And so if you have any questions for me, let me know. The first ever hierarchical divine liturgy that I know of, or that anybody knows, that was signed here first at St. Seraphim Cathedral. So at least we have our DNA stamped in the organization moving forward. But it was a beautiful time. And those, I think the videos or audio of the sessions as well are made for those that could hear, of course. But there's also video of the weekend that's available if you would like to watch it or watch the liturgy being signed. Thanks.
If you've never seen an Orthodox service signed, people often begin to just weep because it's a really beautiful thing. What I said to them is, we think of spoken word, we think of the heard word, but what they do with sign is the word made flesh. And it's a very powerful thing to people who, behind a computer screen, maybe, as Father Jason pointed out, they may be the only deaf Orthodox Christian in the whole state. How lonely would that be, right? But they're alone in silence all the time. And to bring faith to these people is just a really beautiful thing, and it will spread throughout the community over the years. So we have about 30 minutes before we'll have supper served at 5 p.m. I believe we'll have it set up. And then at around 6:15 p.m., we will hope to start the film. If people are interested, that's in the first room as you walk past the bookstore. We'll probably keep the doors closed just for sound, but that'll start about 6:15. His Grace has kindly blessed some libations again that we have left over from last night, so we'll go next door in a moment. Yes.
The film that will be shown this evening is a film by one of our parishioners called El Tonto por Cristo, The Fool for Christ. You'll see some of you who have seen the movie The Island in Russian, you'll see some similarities. And just so you know, Metropolitan Tikhon has already previewed the movie before you've seen it.
There's some Spanish.